This is the fifth section assignment, Declining, by A.Dossman, History 1378. In 1948, the Allied powers had carved land out of the British-controlled territory of Palestine in order to create the State of Israel, which would serve as a homeland for disenfranchised Jews from around the world. Much of the Arab population in the region refused to acknowledge the Israel state. However, over the next decade, sporadic attacks periodically erupted into full-scale conflict. One of these Arab-Israel wars, the Yom Kippur War, began in early October 1973 when Egypt and Syria attacked Israel on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. After Soviet Union began sending arms to Egypt and Syria, U.S. President Richard Nixon began an effort to resupply Israel. In response, members of the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries reduced their petroleum production and proclaimed embargo on oil shipments to the United States and the Netherlands, the main supporters of Israel. Though the Yom Kippur War ended in late October, the embargo and limitations on oil production continued, sparking an international energy crisis. As it turned out, Washington's earlier assumption that oil boycott for political reasons would hurt the Persian Gulf financially turned out to be wrong, as it increased the price of the barrel of oil more than made up for the reduced production. In 3 frenzy months after the embargo was announced, the price of oil shot from $3 a barrel to $12 a barrel. After decades of abundant supply and growing consumption, Americans now face price hikes and fuel shortages, causing lines to form at gasoline stations around the country. Local, state, and national leaders called for measures to conserve energy, asking gas stations to close on Sundays and hostile to the American automotive industry. The oil embargo was lifted in March 1974, but the oil prices remained high, and effects of the energy crisis lingered throughout the decade. In addition to price controls and gasoline rationing, a national speed limit was imposed and daylight saving time was adopted year-round for the period and became a motivating force behind policy making in Washington. Various acts of legislation during the 1970s sought the redefine of America's relationship to fossil fuels and other sources of energy, from the Emergency Petroleum Allocation Act, passed by Congress in November 1973 at the height of the oil panic, to the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975 and the creation of the Department of Energy in 1977. Terrorism is a phenomenon that is spread to nearly all parts of the world in the last part of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. Many countries in the Middle East and North Africa have been at the center of this violence, as the region has suffered from both domestic and international terrorist activities. While it is abundantly clear that there is no single cause that explains terrorism, it has been suggested that increasing globalization has contributed to outbreaks of terrorist violence. It appears to be quite likely that globalization can be linked to political difficulties in a number of countries. Modern terrorism has been a reaction to globalization. Globalization is a very complex process, one that is defined in a belittling variety of ways. There is, however, at least some general agreement on the broad outlines in the economic sphere. Globalization involves the widening, deepening, and speeding of international connectedness. Globalization, however, goes beyond simple increases in economic interactions, as it includes cultural, military, political, and social dimensions, involving the movement of goods, services, people, ideas, and cultures across a geographical space. It appears to be in the first decade of the 21st century, the situation in various parts of the Middle East changed. The attack on 9/11, of course, changed the views of governments, populations, and descendant groups. The attacks had some of the greatest repercussions in the Middle East region and Afghanistan. The 2003 USA invasion of Iraq resulted in increased terrorist and non-terrorist attacks by groups opposed to the U.S. presence, new governments, or other contenders for political power and influence in the state. Islamic jihads came to Iraq from many countries. There were other attacks by Islamic extremists in other countries in the Middle East and North Africa. The Reagan Revolution of the 1980s sought to change Americans' attitudes toward their country, their government, and the world as the United States emerged from the 1970s. Ronald Reagan entered the White House in January 1981, promising to restore Americans' faith in their nation and themselves, to shrink the big government, and to defend America more aggressively, especially against the Soviet Union. As President Reagan promised to cut the budget, reduce taxes, trim the bureaucracy, revive America, and subdue the Soviets. 3 decades after the Reagan Revolution began, we still live in a Reaganized America, with debates about big government and tax cuts continuing. The Reagan Revolution remains unfinished, but it is one of the 20th century America's most significant political movements.